So let me start. So basically, I will be I will be focused on this one question. So, what kind of ethics do online learning healthcare system need? This is the main subject that I want to focus on. I will give some answers, but also I will ask some more questions, which will be pointing at the things that we have to still elaborate later on, and that we still have to decide. So let me start with a case. This case maybe is not exactly about the learning healthcare system and online research, but is very close to that, and it was quite well known and discussed. This is a case from United States. This is a case about Project Nightingale, and this project was a cooperation between Ascension and Google. You probably know the company Google is one of the most important internet company in the world, and Ascension is one of the largest healthcare systems in United States. I don't know if it is the largest or just the second largest in the United States. It doesn't matter. It has hundreds of thousands of patients and hundreds of patients health records. And the cooperation actually looked like this. Ascension gave Google access to its patient identifiable records for machine learning training. And according to US regulation, especially to so-called HIPAA Act, which regulate privacy information within the healthcare systems, no law was broken. But of course, this was very controversial because Google had this access to this vast database, and people were not aware of that, and they couldn't withdraw their data, and of course they were not informed in advance. So my question to you is that okay? Maybe in accordance to law, it's fine. But what is your opinion? Is a healthcare system entitled to share this kind of information in order to improve its functioning, in order to let's say to identify what can be improved in a health care system? So what is your idea about this?
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
I think maybe would it depend also on like how the hospital discloses how this data is being used. For example, oh, this data will stay in the system only for this system to use, but not cross over into other places.
Okay, so you said that when the data is in some kind of safe haven and is used just for a very limited purpose, that would be okay, and this is not so much controversial. Yeah.
If it's for machine learning, like understanding how to better serve the patients and help the doctors care for them and the professionals to care for them, then yes. But if it's crossing over to like people taking this information and maybe like selling it to advertisement companies, then that's like a very terrible thing.
Yes, of course. That would be understandable, but I think that was limited exactly to this function. Ania, yes, you want to say something? Please go ahead.
Personally, I think that it's pretty unethical considering that healthcare information is very, very sensitive and private information. And if these patients don't have full knowledge of how it's being disclosed to other companies and businesses, whether or not it's being used to improve the healthcare they're receiving. I think that's a strong violation of privacy.
Yeah. Abdurrahman?
Yes, so I think it's hard to be ethical because sometimes it can include some profit for the company that will benefit from that. So it can also mention that have identifiable information, so that could also double the issue or the risk for the patient to be identified on the issue.
Yeah. So here you are mentioning at least two issues. On the one hand, my records are used to generate someone's someone income, so someone additional benefits without my knowledge and without my approval. And on the other hand, even if my privacy is not broken, it increases the risk of to my privacy somehow, because the data has to travel, or some additional people have access, and this is just additional hazard to my privacy. Yes, Katrina, you are muted.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the perceived threat. Even if you could guarantee that everything would be private and the transferring of this information for machine learning is perfectly safe, you have an obligation to the patient's perceived violation of privacy, I think.
Yes, exactly. Let's say a healthcare situation is a very special situation in that sense that there is just a few areas where we have this kind of professional relationship between persons, when we can have like very reasonable expectations of privacy, and one of them is this fiduciary relationship between a patient and a doctor. And because I want to disclose everything which is relevant to my health to my doctor, and everything could be recorded in my health record, through the whole history of medical ethics, this was a very significant aspect of this relation. I mean, confidentiality has been this very significant aspect, and in that sense, technology somehow tinkers at least with this aspect. So it somehow even if it doesn't pierce this confidentiality in the sense that no additional person has access to this information, at least it creates this kind of, as you said, I think, perception that this is not so safe. Yes, that someone else could have access. Anything else that we can say about this?
Jan, I think someone is raising their hand. So
yes, yes. Just let me see. So, Vadat, please go ahead.
Yes, I agree actually with what has been said about this practice being unacceptable and unethical. The information the patient has given to the hospital or to the system was given in trust, and the trust has been broken. Whatever minor details are in that information, or insignificant as it is still given in trust from a patient who is vulnerable. So this is making use of a vulnerable population, the patients who need to come to give the information to this system to get the required treatment. Any kind of information that has to be shared, they have to get consent from the owners of those of this information, which is the patient. So it's to me, it's obnoxious. It's totally unethical. Thank you.
Yeah. So right now, I don't want to resolve this case. I just want to let's say to point out that there are this two values that we have to balance in this case, or the case shows that these two values are engaged in this situation. So on the one hand, we have this medical confidentiality and this reasonable expectations of privacy, and which is very important for the fiduciary and a special character of relationship between patient and medical professionals. But on the other hand, we have all the benefits that comes from improving the whole system and applying of these new technologies. So this is this case about. We will come back to this case later. So let me go to the next case. Sorry, because yes. So this is not a case about. This is a case not about a specific mental well-being app, because there is a lot of them, but generally it is thought that they improve psychological functioning. They collect a lot of health-related data, and they use this data for research and health improvement. And generally, the question is, let's say, the app. Of course, at the beginning, you agree for data processing, but later on, the app developers have agreement with researchers, and they want to give access to the identified data of this app users in order to improve the health app and subsequently to improve the care that the app provides to their users. And in that situation, what do you think? Should the app developers contact again their clients, their users, and ask for additional consent, or it would be totally okay to just to use the data and improve the app? I see that Katrina is raising her hand, so please go ahead.
Yeah, I think that in general, de-identified data is fine as long as it's uniform. You're collecting the same, like for instance, you have columns of information and you're collecting the same kind of information, or it's just numbers. But this is specific. They're going to be collecting data from people who are talking about their symptoms. They're talking about specific things that are very unique to them. So not that, I mean, it's not identified, but in a sense, it might be. Because there's everyone's unique in their mental well-being, and it's you might get some variation enough that someone could be identified. So,
yes, that's true. So you are saying about two things. That one thing is that sensitivity of data, and of course, like all health data or health related data is sensitive, but there are some, let's say, extra sensitive information in our health data, and this is, for instance, about our mental health, about our reproductive health, and there is probably a few other areas that are extra sensitive that we don't want to share because, for instance, they're associated with some kind of social stigma. Yes, and right now, nowadays, one can also argue that there is, when the set of data about one individual is rich enough, the risk of re-identification of this data is is much higher. So right now, the specialists of people who specialize in data protection, they say that we shouldn't use the term anonymous records, because all of the records can be de-anonymized if they are coupled with the information that is available on the web. So you can couple all the information that you have about the patient, and you can also look what that person say left online, and it's quite easy to re-identify people, especially if you invest some time and effort into doing this. Yes, someone else want to say something? So please go ahead. Sorry for jumping through the slide, but when you have opened a presentation, the list of participants and the camera, I'm jumping from one window to another, and sometimes I accidentally also jump into other slides. Yeah, I see that someone says something in the chat. Adriana says that I think it's important for mental health app developers to be transparent about how they use people's data. Developers should prioritize people's privacy and data security and ask for additional consent if they want to use the data for anything beyond improving their app. Yes, of course. But let's say currently I talked to my friend who has done a lot of interviews with this kind of app developers. I think that his paper, his name is Kamil Verbeke. His paper is just being published about this topic. And one argument that many developers and researchers say is that when you ask for additional consent, you are actually, let's say, turning your even if it is done in an easy way, so you have this additional popping out window with the consent, they're losing the users. So instead of just having the data and improve the app and improve the experience of people with mental health challenges, they are somehow repelling them from the app, although they are not doing anything which is wrong. So here again, we have this another argument which says that any additional aspect that, let's say, disturb the experience of using the app, for instance, this like popping up window with the text that you have to go through, to some extent either ruins your experience or repels significant number of users, and like the whole population of users cannot really take advantage of improved app. So any other idea or argument in this case? If not, just to summarize, these two cases allows us to really see what I'm going to talk about this conflict between well-known and well-established ethics of healthcare on the one hand, and then a completely new environment of internet, and how the values which are somehow embedded in these two different kind of institutions sometimes collide. So let me close all the windows and go into the next slide. So first, I will say something about learning healthcare systems. So I will give you a definition. Then I will be talking about evolution of ethics, and especially evolution of research ethics, because this is not something which is constant, but is something that adjusts to the the nature of research itself. Then I will give you some examples of online learning healthcare. So how can learning healthcare system take advantage of being online or being connected to the internet? What can be done? And at the end, I will return to my initial question. So what kind of ethics do online learning healthcare need, and what can be done? What can be done about it? So the Institute of Medicine in 2015 defined learning healthcare system as a system in which science, informatics, incentives, and culture are aligned for continuous improvement and innovation, with best practices seamlessly embedded in delivery process and new knowledge captured as integral byproduct of delivery experience. So we can, let's say, translate it in a very simple figure. So we have the three phases of learning in a healthcare system. We have care, which is at the same time collection of data. Then this data is analyzed to generate a knowledge, which can be then translated into improved care delivery. So this is the core of a learning healthcare system. And what is new about learning healthcare systems? The new thing is this integration of health and research, because since, at least, let's say in US context, but this is somehow also generalizable for the rest of the world, since US is a very culturally influential country, at least since 1979. So the date when the Belmont report was published, there was a very strong conceptual and regulatory separation between practice and research. So practice and research has been regulated differently. And we can ask ourselves right now a question. What are the reasons for a distinction and for the separation between practice and research? So we have different set of regulation for practice and different set of regulation for research, and we want to, let's say, to talk differently about these two aspects of biomedicine. Why it is so? Do you have any ideas about that? Have you heard about this before, that there are two different ethical approaches to this, to care and to research?
Does it have to do with the harm, the possible harm that may come to the participant?
Mm-hmm. And who is speaking?
Diana.
Diana. Okay. Yes, probably. We can assume that research can be associated with a little bit more risk than healthcare practice. Yeah. Kathy,
I would
please.
also add that you also have that with the clinical care, the treatment, that there is a focus on the benefit to the individual as compared to in research, the benefit is to the greater good, more of a utilitarian perspective, and that the individual may or may not benefit, and very conceivably they may never even realize a personal benefit.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So research is focused on the greater good, on the future patients, and care is focused on the current patient and his or her well-being right now. Yes, so there is the difference in priorities. Anything else that can be said about this? Yes, Abdul Rahman, please.
Yeah, I think the main goal of them differs, because the research is the main goal is seeking information and exploring. The practice is treating the patient based on valid information that have been tested and experienced. Yes,
exactly. This is the right one. Maybe we can also add some historical context. So the commission that issued the Belmont report was established just because we had a lot of scandals, moral scandals within the realm of biomedical research. So yeah. So this is another let's say historical context. Someone says something on chat. Let me check.
There's something I'd like to highlight also, that at times the role of the practitioner is, well, it depends, but if, say, the practitioner is the oncologist who is doing the research, that we suffer a lot of issues like therapeutic misconceptions and what have you. But most importantly, the physician also plays the role of requesting a new biologic for compassionate use. So that's these are two different things.
Can you put your hand on a hot fire?
Yes. This is of course you are now touching a lot of very complicated issues. I don't want to go to too many details, but of course this conflict between practice and research goes very deep, and especially, for instance, in some areas of research, like in oncology, the lines are very blurred and are uncertain. So I don't want to say that everything here is cleared, but at least in some point of time, and I'm going to talk about evolution of research ethics, at least at some point of time, this reason that we already mentioned was pointed out in order to very strictly paint the line and separate research and practice. And in the Belmont report, the term research was defined in a very specific way. So the term research designates an activity designed to test a hypothesis, permit conclusion to be drawn, and thereby to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. So this aspect of knowledge was also mentioned. And the term practice refers to intervention that are designed solely to enhance the well-being of an individual patient or client, and that have a reasonable expectation of success. Sorry for a second. And you already mentioned that one of the main reasons is this conflict of interest between current patients and future patients, between science and care. And even if we don't have a previous knowledge about certain therapies, when we involve patient into research, we have to quit this standard of personal care, and we have to involve certain procedures as randomization and blinding what is given to a patient, which can also compromise the standard of personal care. And usually it was thought, and it's often the case, that there is this difference in terms of risk. So research, when we try to do research about some new components, can be much more risky, and it's not focused on the well-being of individual patients. So that's why, as I already said, research is regulated differently than practice, and research has to go through ethics review of institutional review board or research ethics committees, which check the value and validity of research, which check procedures of confidentiality. They also review informed consent that must satisfy let's say much stronger norms. So much more information has to be disclosed to a person who is a research participant than to a person who just in a clinical context. So of course, when you are prescribed a new medication, doctors should not hide any kind of information from you. But if you are not asking about details, he's not or she's not obliged to give you like all the details about the medication that is prescribed, and the practice is governed just by this personal relation, fiduciary relation between physician and patient. And if there is any review, it's usually retrospective, and is done only when patient or his family or her family has some doubts about the care that was provided to a patient. But when we look at the at research ethics, and when we add some kind of a time parameter, then we can see that that there is a kind of evolution. And Emmanuel and Grady, they thought about this kind of different paradigms, and they were talking about evolution of ethics paradigm. Of course, this is a kind of a allusion to this idea of Thomas Kuhn, who come up with this idea of scientific paradigms which change from one to another, and there are somehow copy this idea. However, Thomas Kuhn was talking about the revolution, that one paradigm replaces completely the old paradigm. But Emmanuel and Grady, they are talking about evolution when there is no total replacement, but there is, let's say, a change of focus and maybe even some kind of accumulation of our medical, of our ethical knowledge about medicine and research. And there mentioned this 4 different paradigms. The first paradigm is a researcher paternalism. The second paradigm is regulatory protectionism. The third one is participant access, and the fourth one is community partnership. And when we were talking about Belmont report, so Belmont report happened when we wanted to organize, to regulate the research, and this is how the regulatory protectionism was born. But of course, regulatory protectionism was not so much, let's say, efficient in certain situations. So that's why right now, just as an example, I would like to focus on this passage, on this evolutionary, let's say, rupture somehow, when we come from regulatory protectionism, so from this like very firm distinction between research and practice to a more nuanced distinction in a participatory access paradigm. So what defines a paradigm according to Grady and Emmanuel? There are different aspects. We can talk about 5 different aspects and 6 triggering events. So one aspect is a key protection of a research participant. Second aspect is conception of subject. So how we think about research participant, research subject. Then is conception of research. So how we think about research. And then what is underlining moral philosophy, which helps us to distinguish between, to resolve ethical problems and ethical dilemmas. And then there is this highlighted ethical principle. So ethical principle, which is the most important in that paradigm. And when we talk about regulatory protectionism, so this key protection was, on the one hand, individual consent, but on the other hand, IRB, independent IRB review. How conceptualized was the subject? So subject was seen as a vulnerable party who has to be protected by regulation, as our previous experience showed us. And this conception of research proposed this very sharp distinction between healthcare and practice. And of course, that was not a description based on pure distinction, which was not based on pure description, but this was rather a prescriptive distinction. So we wanted to conceptually differentiate between practice and research. And underlying philosophy in that sense was this famous principalism, which is a middle-level theory that distinguishes between 3 or 4 ethical principles, so respect for persons or respect for autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. And in every situation that is morally ambivalent, when we have a moral dilemma, we try to find a reflective equilibrium between this all 4 or 3 principles. And what is the highlighted ethical principle? In that case, it was independent review. But then something happened. This triggering event was HIV/AIDS epidemics, and patients demand to have quick access to experimental drugs, but drugs at the same time had this promise of saving their life. So there was a very strong pressure from the patient and their families that this regulations should be relaxed, because actually they blocked the because they blocked the development of drugs. And the evolution meant that we moved to this participant access paradigm, where the key protection was individual autonomy. So every person can decide for his or her own what to do, what level of risk that person is ready to accept, how the subject was conceptualized. It was thought, a subject was thought as a person who is an informed consumer. So a medicine is something like a personal service, something which has to match personal preferences. And this distinction, this very firm distinction between research and practice, became a little bit blurred, because it was thought that clinical research is actually, in that case, the best type of clinical care. Individual rights-based theory was somehow replaced principalism, and this highlighted ethical principle was informed consent. And of course, this participant access ethics didn't totally replace regulatory protections. It changed a little bit regulations. So there were a lot of different new gates for participants to require, let's say, expedient review or expedient access and this kind of things. But the regulations were not totally abolished. So that's why we are talking about this kind of evolution of ethics paradigms. But then another thing happened, and here I have a case that I took from Tom Beecham and all article. This is a case of Dr. Pronovost checklist. So this is a story about regulators in the Office of Human Research Protections, which is the US highest office for the protection of human subjects, halted the Pronovost project. The allegation was that Pronovost and the 67 Michigan hospitals were using patients in human subject research without informed consent. Pronovost funded activities were part of a study to improve medical care. It was sponsored by the Michigan Hospital Association, and the aim was to improve care in ICUs by strictly implementing preventive procedures that had already been recommended by the CDC. such as washing hands and using certain infection control precautions and the like. So that was the case that is here. So what do you think about this? Can you make any comment about this issue? I saw that you are active somehow on the chat. I'm not able to follow everything right now, so please unmute yourself if you want to comment on this case. What is important here? What do you think? Why this project was halted, and was that a right decision? What is controversial here?
I just have a question, actually. I mean, not that it would matter really, but like the preventative measures, how like and what is an example, or like how invasive were they, how would it depend? I mean, in such a case, would it be relevant or not, to the extent like what you're doing to the patient without their knowledge?
No, there was nothing that let's say changed in patient experience. They were rather, let's say, the main goal was to make this list, make this checklist visible, and check how people are following exactly this checklist that demanded certain procedures as washing hands or separating infectious items and things like that. So in terms of, let's say, patient experience or intrusion into patients, it didn't really change anything. The allegation was that the patients were not informed that they are part of the research project. However, one could argue that actually not patients were research subject, but rather healthcare professionals were were subjects, because the main intervention was focused on healthcare professionals and how their behavior is changed if we are applying this kind of a standardized checklist that you have to follow, and how, let's say, this kind of a reminder in your work environment works. So let's say right now, if I go to the doctor, especially after COVID-19 epidemics, you can see all this kind of checklists on the walls. Previously, it wasn't that, and that was this kind of intervention. Was my explanation really explaining? Did I clarify sufficiently? Yeah. Katrina, please.
Yes, I thought you did. I was thinking, so this is about improving healthcare. So I'm wondering if coercion was a concern, because you know, all patients, of course, want their healthcare professionals to do all of these things for the benefit of their care. So it's natural to want that, but then also to include it in a research study without their consent. It's kind of like, I mean, it's sort of like coercion, I think. Potential coercion.
Potential coercion, but maybe coercion is a little bit too strong word, but let's say lack of respect for autonomy. Yes, that because when I think about coercion, maybe my linguistic sense is not so sensitive. In English, I'm thinking about some kind of physical constraint and pushing someone into some situation. and in that sense, you are not just informed about all aspects of your situation that you are in. Yeah, and that was actually the base of this allegation. But at least for some people, and Beauchamp is one of them, this is a case where overprotection leads to underprotection. And how it works, how this argument here looks like. So the argument looks like this. We use a lot of different protective mechanisms like informed consent, IRB review, and so on. And this regulations and this procedure can, on the one hand, delay introduction or applying of a beneficial procedure that we already know works, and on the other hand can slow down the research project, repel or some patients who will not agree, give another, let's say, administrative burden on those patients. And in that sense, it will lead to protection, because the group of patients who can already benefited from that procedure, if there were no such protection, would not benefit, because this whole action would delay like proper application or adoption of this beneficial technique. So this regulatory overprotection leads to, let's say, healthcare underprotection and exposing patients to additional risk. Because, let's say, Beauchamp argues that it is very hard to imagine that a patient would not like to, let's say, participate in this kind of research, especially if he or she knows that the procedure which is, let's say, checked is already known to improve care, and which, let's say, create some kind of incentives or prompts for healthcare professional to really strictly adhere to certain procedures. Yes, so that this is what this argument actually says. And this is how this new paradigm, we can say, was born. Of course, at that time when it was introduced, it was not called a new ethical paradigm. It was just a proposal of new ethics framework for learning healthcare system. And as I already mentioned, in 2013, a special issue of Hastings Center report was published, and this group of authors, Faden, Cass, Godman, Pronovost, Tunis, and Bisham, they actually published their 2 different articles. One was focused just on research ethics framework. The second was focused on the distinction between research and practice, and how digitalization somehow impacts this distinction. And they propose this new ethical framework, so that I would like to discuss with you further. So this framework is based on this assumption that when we look purely descriptively on how research and practice actually look like today, we can't see any big difference, and we have to also let's say, consider this when we think about how to morally regulate research and care. So they distinguish this 5 different elements that usually were thought to separate practice and research, and they are giving arguments which shows that this is actually not the case. So it was thought that research led to generalizable knowledge, and practice really was not. But when we have digitalized healthcare, when we can collect the data in a systematic manner, then also practice can lead to a generalizable knowledge. So these two first assumptions are already right now, according to this group of researchers, invalid. It was also argued usually that research pose more net risk than benefit than practice, and they are also pointing a lot of research where it is showed that actually this is not the case. So they are trying to argue that research does not pose more net risk and less benefit than practice. Also, risk and burden which are associated with research and practice are somehow comparable, because if their argument is that if we have a certain practice which is untested, which is unproved, usually this practice also imposes additional unnecessary burdens and risk on patients, and they are pointing out to many different practices which has been proved in the course of the history that were not so beneficial and actually risky, and we didn't know that there are so because we were basing our judgments on intuitions and not really strict research. And also they recognize the fact that research usually requires a strict protocol, and somehow these strict protocols deviates care which is given to patients from this standard of personal care, because the care cannot be adjusted to personal needs. But they also recognize that this is also a case of practice, which is also restricted very often, especially by insurance schemes and different shortages and lack of resources, personnel, and things like that. So according to them, there is no strict distinction between practice and research anymore, and that's why we should also reconsider how a new research ethics for learning healthcare should look like. And they propose a new framework. So instead of these 4 ethical principles, so respect for autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice, they are proposing a set of 7 moral obligations. And what is interesting, these moral obligations are bounding not only for healthcare professionals, but also for, at least some of them, also for healthcare administrators and stakeholders, and also some of them for patients themselves. So on the one hand, we have this respect for rights and dignity of patients. That's of course binding for all healthcare professionals and administrators. But we have also respect for clinician judgment, and this is something that is binding for healthcare administrators, because when we have this kind of learning healthcare systems, the assumption is that also our healthcare is somehow standardized and should be based on evidence. So this space for clinician judgment seems to be shrinking, and this is this kind of a reminder that we should respect the judgment of the clinicians, not look only at the regulation and schemes and and procedure, but we should trust that the clinician will take the scientific evidence and the particular situation of a patient and will adjust the patient accordingly to the needs of a patient. But the other side of the same coin looks also that the whole system, so healthcare professionals and administrators and so on, are obliged to provide optimal clinical care to each patient, and they should avoid imposing non-clinical risk and burdens on patients. Avoid, but it doesn't mean that that they should not do it sometimes in a minimal scale in order to actually to collect in a systematic way generalizable knowledge. And one of the main justification that is given for healthcare, for learning healthcare system, is that learning healthcare help us not only to optimize healthcare for each individual, but also it helps us to, let's say, to optimize, to make more efficient and official the whole healthcare system. So in that sense, also to address health inequalities. So we resign from this kind of over-diagnostic procedure or over-prescribing, which can also lead to, let's say, not just distribution of health resources. And another obligation which is binding for healthcare professionals and also for healthcare administrators and all stakeholders who are involved in healthcare systems is this conduct of continuous learning activities that improve the quality of clinical care and healthcare systems. So research, healthcare professionals, physicians are at the same time considered to be researchers, and they have to participate in providing in this kind of clinical activities. Excuse me for a second. Okay. I hope my voice will still work. And the last obligation is actually to patients who are also obliged to contribute to the common purpose of improving the quality and value of clinical care and healthcare systems. So the main argument is that usually patients are also beneficiaries of well working and efficient and effective healthcare systems, and this kind and their situation somehow creates this moral justification to reciprocity, to pay back, and also to contribute to the common purpose of improving healthcare. So how would the paradigm for learning healthcare system look like? So the triggering event here would be this digitization of healthcare. Key protection would be systematic improvement of care, because actually patient will be protected from harm and risk by this constant development of science, of biomedical science. And the conception of subject is a beneficiary of care. So he or she benefits from healthcare. Conception of research is practice, actually is research at the same time. Not research is practice, but practice is research. Underlying philosophy is this framework of 7 moral obligations, and highlighted the most important, like the most revolutionary, let's say, ethical principle is this obligation to contribute. Okay, so Right now, I also would like to ask you a question. What do you think when you absorb all this information about learning healthcare system, when you have your own previous knowledge, what could be the role of internet in learning healthcare systems? So when you imagine that the main idea of the healthcare system is to collect information and improve care, so how can learning healthcare system benefit from internet, or how can apply what is happening on internet for learning about healthcare? What are your
The patient awareness, maybe, and them being able to access more information and to be more aware of what's happening and understand specifically. I don't know. Yeah, that's off the top of my head. Like the patients, for the patients, that you can provide them with more education and awareness.
Yes, this is a very good observation. So we can use internet as a tool of communication in order to provide patients with more information. Yeah, that's a very could be even more specific how it would look like. What kind of tools healthcare professionals or healthcare administrators would use in order to provide this education and information to patient?
Like, since I think most people, they're not very into reading information, maybe like educational videos perhaps, or informational videos such as that.
Where there are that videos would be placed? Sorry for pressing you a little bit.
They would be like there would be a special portal that would be created, or a platform that would be created, like an app or something. Yeah,
it's a very good idea. So a healthcare system can think about a special platform, a special application. Yes, there could be also, for instance, some challenges. Let's say how to encourage or incentivize patients to visit not only, I don't know, BuzzFeed or I don't know, Sky News or whatever people are using to check their information, but also to go on that portal and check some information. But this is Katrina, I know that you were raising your hand for a while, so please go ahead.
Yeah, here. Hello.
I was thinking, so I'm sorry. So the collecting of quantitative data only, de-identified quantitative data to show trends, that would be probably a good way to collect data. So anything to say how many times someone is accessing it, a certain site, and how many people are suffering from different types of illnesses, or how many people are suffering, I mean, just an account, quantitative data only. That would be one way.
Yes. Abdul Rahman, please.
Yeah, sure. I think the internet can benefit. The amount of the data that can be gathered is huge, much larger to implement it in the healthcare system. Also, there is other aspect that could be important, is the telemedicine, especially in cases that people cannot arrive to the hospital, or cases that some can be ashamed from to seek help, such as psychological disease, where the internet can benefit the care system.
So you think about this kind of a telecare, that internet provides new tools to use telecare. Yeah? So you have a camera and you can quickly connect to a patient. Anything else that you can think of? I think that Katrina had a very good idea, but could you tell me how this quantitative data could be collected on internet? Actually, from what kind of sources this data about let's say incidents or things like that could be retrieved.
I'm not familiar with the intricate details of the technology that could be used, but it should be de-identified quantitative data only. And then you could assess trends of, you know, what people are interested in knowing about. Also, you know, trends of like psychological issues, but without you instead of actually going on the site and collecting all the individual information without the names, you would just, you know, how many people are seeking help with some kind of psychosis, how many people are assessing for depression, how many people, you know, and where they are, and that, or, you know, what areas of the country, not necessarily zip code. So things like that.
Yes, I see that Van Singu is raising her hand. Please go ahead.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, I think like here at the Tanzania Bugando Hospital, we have a kind of learning through the internet, whereby all the patients are being different kind of a revisiting schedule in their app form, and it's a types of reminder for the next coming visit. For example, those on a CTC kind of treatment, who are revisiting usually for coming, taking their investigation types and their RT administration. So they have an app like reminder of the patients to reschedule for their visit. But another thing here at BMC Bugando Medical Center have been tried a lot to have a web like all patients, because we have different activities within here as a consultation hospital. So we have to alert the community that we will be having these types of community engagement activities like screening of mammograph or looking of the ENT. So all those details, they go direct into website. But another things, we have our videos for every department in a patient sitting waiting place, whereby you have a kind of recording info currently need for the patients to have it in touch when they are within the hospital. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, that's you mentioned at least one very useful thing, that is this kind of an app which reminds patients about the visit. So it also works for efficiency, so that the resources are not wasted. Yeah. Okay. So I went through a couple of different systematic reviews about how internet can be used in learning healthcare, and I found out a few categories. So this is based not on my systematic review, but on some other people of few different systematic reviews that I summarize here. So on the one hand, we can use a condition dedicated and user-centered smartphone application. So you already talked about this. We started with a well-being app, but there are apps for diabetes patients, for patients with I don't know, with some kind of cardiac conditions and things like that, or allergies, whatever. So you can have you can look at the impact on patients and impact on healthcare system. So a patient receives notification about medication intake. So a reminder, you have to take your medicine, about checkup visits, or about any kind of different diagnostic and so on procedures. This kind of app can also have access to your geolocation and can inform you about certain conditions, for instance, pool and smoke alerts, and any other hazards or things that can be connected to your geolocation. And a lot of things can be also connected to the smartphone. There are different how you call it, sensors that can check your heart rate, calories burned, and calories intake. For instance, you can just upload the photo and it can estimate how many calories you are taking. Any kind of devices also for asthmatic patients, for instance, that you can use on Bluetooth in order to not only to better monitor your own state and your own condition. This kind of app can also give you access to your own health, electronic health records. So you are going to a different specialist and you can transfer very easy this information on, and you just want to check to refresh your memory, and you are seeking a second opinion and anything. You already said that this can also be used to scheduling checkup visits and to communication with healthcare professionals. So when a patient feels a need that she or he has to communicate with a healthcare provider. What is the impact on a learning healthcare system? So on the one hand, it is a very demanding thing because a learning healthcare system has to build its own app or adapt already existing app. It has either hire new IT specialist, which will build the app and maintain it, or it has a very clear cooperation with developers. And of course, when it has cooperation with developers, this is all like all these aspects that we already discussed about the privacy here are important. On the other hand, learning healthcare system then collects a lot of versatile data from all patients using a condition dedicated app. So a lot of data of different aspects of life is collected. So a new insights, new statistical analysis can be done, and some unexpected things can be discovered. We already mentioned it that it can prevent unnecessary visit and reduce the cost of treatment for one patient and for the whole cohorts of patients. And also it can be used to contact patients. Not only patients can use it to contact the health care providers, but if there is necessary to contact the patients, for instance, we collect a lot of information, we have a new insights, and we want to quickly connect with our patients. This is also available. Second thing is the social media based of search trends, info surveillance, and social media based interventions. So this is actually very diverse area. For instance, for a long time, Twitter was used for this kind of let's say info surveillance platform, and it has impact on privacy online because the user generated content may be used to in a different way that it was intended, and patients and user can be subject to unwanted intervention. And actually, there is a lot of data right now which suggests that when we use this kind of machine learning based techniques, this kind of sometimes they are called artificial intelligence based on someone social media activity. We can not only, let's say, quite freely diagnose things like, let's say, infectious diseases, like because people sometimes they disclose it, but they sometimes on social media they describe their symptoms, so we can detect the symptoms of this kind of infectious diseases, food poisoning, things like that, but also of mental conditions, for instance, psychosis incidents or depressions incidents. So a lot of information actually about patients can be retrieved from social media, but this is but this comes with one very important caveat. For instance, information that is retrieved from certain social media like Twitter cannot be really de-identified, because every single tweet has its tweet ID, and this tweet ID is again linked to a person who tweeted it. And of course, when we collect data from social media, at least at the beginning, we have access to identified information. So what is impact on the learning healthcare system? So first of all, a learning healthcare system, in order to do it, it has to build capacity to do it. It has to have resources and skilled people to monitor social media, or it has to cooperate with people who are doing it. But what is the benefit? The benefit is a real-time insight into the development, for instance, of infectious diseases, and this is also already proven that social media give us this very quick information how infection the disease is developing to different health trends. And this kind of information also allows us to give this kind of prediction of disease burden and how a healthcare system has to prepare. So what kind of resources has to be marshaled in order to cope with influx of patients. But it also enable healthcare professionals to assess users' reactions to health events. So what people know, how people talk about it, what is their general attitude, the level of knowledge, and so on. Healthcare professionals can also track misinformation and disinformation campaigns on social media. And these two elements, so assessing users' reaction to health events and tracking misinformation and disinformation, can help to prepare education and preventive intervention. So for instance, healthcare professionals are not surprised how people behave, or what are the preconceptions about certain diseases or health events. Another thing how internet can be used for learning healthcare system is, for instance, social media based research recruitment. So patients can easily find out and receive information that is relevant to their health or to their relatives' health. And patient can give their informed consent using online tools. It's also this kind of distance between healthcare, a bit between researchers and patients. When we talk about informed consent, can be also considered to be ethically important thing, because then this kind of pressure or this personal connection with a researcher doesn't play such important role in this context, when this distance is bigger. What is the impact on learning healthcare system, though, is that the healthcare system has to build its presence on internet, for instance, on social media, in order to advertise this kind of research. And generally, it is a big challenge to be present on internet, because although people are on internet for a very extended periods of time, they usually visit social media sites, not let's say their hospital sites. Only a very narrow group of patients would follow this kind of websites. Then engagement. Then a learning healthcare system can engage with patients and talk with them about privacy and principles, how to protect themselves. For instance, I quite recently read a paper about this kind of recruitment. So before you recruit a patient, you have to inform a patient how to be recruited in a way that doesn't compromise your privacy. Yes? For instance, because if you are using a normal browser without, let's say, privacy mode or something like that, and you recruit yourself to a certain research, or you click a certain post about disease and research, you will be targeted by a certain health information, and you will your browser and internet provider and many different parties will know that you are interested in this kind of information. Maybe you don't want them to know that you are sick, or someone in your family is sick and can be interested in this kind of research. So before you even click a link or a post about certain condition or of advertisement, you should know what are your default privacy setting in your browser, and how you can protect your privacy. So it requires learning healthcare systems to inform the patients about what to do in order to protect themselves. But on the other hand, of course, it can give a very fast and easy way to recruit research participants, which is not so easy these days. Then there is also the social media-based communications with patients. You already mentioned this. So patient can share information with one another and cooperate with researchers to enhance biomedical knowledge. And of course, again, it requires learning healthcare system to build its presence on internet and patients to generate a lot of valuable data that can improve their daily and long-term well-being. So this is a very important resource that is that can be used, especially in chronic conditions and people who are struggling with their disease. They not only improve their own self-care, but based on their experience, a healthcare system can build this kind of practical guidelines to help future patients, to inform them about these possibilities. And especially this kind of information can be very much localized. So let's say practical advice for certain conditions in different geographic location can be very different than in another geographic location. And then finally, we use internet-based research, so patient can easily participate in research and contribute to the development of generalizable knowledge using different different platforms, and of course it requires from a learning healthcare system to build infrastructure to recruit patients or to use existing research platform to reach its patients. That could be very simple research based on questionnaires or something like that, but of course it requires this kind of a reach out to patients. So what, of course, these are not all ethical conflicts which are associated with online learning, but I would like to mention at least 3, and I will focus a little bit more on the third one. I see that you are very active on chat, but I'm not able to follow. If you have any immediate question, please let me know. I will look at the chat a little bit later. So the first ethical conflict that we can see is this conflict or tension between the obligation to contribute and the right to control one electronic health record. You remember that one obligation in this framework for learning healthcare system was this obligation to contribute. And of course, in that sense, we can tinker with this obligation and, for instance, says that there are some sensitive information that we are not obliged to contribute. That when we contribute, this should be only in the de-identified form and a really minimized information, really focus on certain very concrete research questions. But of course, our electronic health records can be very rich. They can contain a lot of not only medical images, but also like personal communication with healthcare providers. For instance, when we think about mental health care, the notes that healthcare professional, a psychiatrist takes when we talk to him about our, for instance, mental problems and things like that. And also third parties could be implicated because not only health history, but also our let's say mental situation can somehow refer to our family history and to people who are connected to us and so on. So here is a very strong tension about what kind of information we are really obliged to contribute, one we can reserve for ourselves, and in what case, in what situation we should be asked for informed consent, and how to really balance that. There are different ideas that, for instance, there should be certain panels that involve this kind of democratic, deliberative approach, and patients can, let's say, discuss how what is the spectrum of this obligation. Another conflict that we can already see is the obligation to conduct continuous learning activities and the obligation to protect healthcare institution. Actually, this is also important thing. In 2017, Gregory Simon, also a psychiatrist, brought this to the attention of healthcare professionals and ethicists, that sometimes in this kind of research we are, for instance, checking which institution, which hospital, which medical facility is doing better, and sometimes when we collect all this information and it's not properly analyzed and the results are revealed, then a certain institution, for instance, can come up as a worse, as a underperforming thing. But this is not necessary, because healthcare professionals, there are less trained or less skilled or not so wise, but this is because they have a different pool of patients and things like that. So there is also this obligation and the risk for healthcare institution who participates in this kind of learning activities to protect reputation of that institution, and to some in some situation there can be a tension between this obligation and an obligation to contribute. Excuse me. And finally, this is something that I would like to focus a little bit more. There is this tension between healthcare system and the internet. I already mentioned this tension, that in healthcare system, privacy is a very important thing, and privacy is regulated by law and professional ethics codes of ethics. And patients can reasonably expect privacy and confidentiality. And this privacy and confidentiality is not something, let's say, superfluous. This is something which is essential for building this kind of fiduciary relationship between patients and healthcare professionals. There is a bunch of research which were done in early 2000s when a lot of hospitals and medical facilities adopted electronic health records. So they were going from the paper-based records to electronic-based records. And at that time, a lot of patients were very concerned about these innovations, and they even, like a substantial percentage of patients declared that they will draw certain information from healthcare professionals because they don't want that this information is stored in an electronic way, because and this can not only undermine the relationship between healthcare professionals and patients, but it can also has impact on the quality of care that a patient received. Because if healthcare professional doesn't get important information about health of a patient, he or she cannot really make a clear clinical judgment. Yes, because some important information, for instance, about mental state, about certain symptoms that a person considers shameful, are not disclosed. So privacy is very important value in the context of healthcare, and privacy has a completely different meaning and significance on the internet. So on the internet, users make constant decisions about their privacy, and of course there is this huge discussion. What are the, like, let's say, true preferences about privacy? Is that we some people argue that we really care, but technology doesn't give us sense to protect our privacy. But let's say we have completely different approach to privacy on internet, and sometimes we are agreed to share and to be present online much more than in the context of medical care. And there is also issue of privacy literacy. So people might not be fully aware of the consequences of their decision, what they are doing, and what kind of privacy settings they have. So there was, for instance, a research on Twitter users, and a lot of them didn't know that default option on Twitter is that everything is seen for everyone. At least it was that when the research was done a few years ago. So there is this tension between these two different contexts. So right now we can again ask ourselves a question: what is the main ethical problem of online learning healthcare systems? So how would you summarize it? What is needed in order, let's say, to go from offline learning healthcare systems to online healthcare systems? What kind of aspects of ethics or what kind of ethical aspect we have to develop? What's your opinion? Any suggestion? Yes, please.
May I?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes. Well, there are obviously privacy issues and trust issues. These are very important ethical dilemmas that will face an online system.
Yes.
The possibility of abuse, misuse, in the wrong hands. This is an issue, and there is no privacy online. If you watch The Social Dilemma, there's no privacy online. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I see that Diana is also raising her hand. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I think like trustworthiness. How do you put trust into your patients to ensure that all data and all kind of information are secured and safely? Because when he or she tried to explore his or her information in a confident manner, so the institution has a mandatory, or they have an authority to ensure that they trust to them so that their information will be protected. But another thing is SOP. We have standard operating procedures with different kind of learning healthcare system. So they have to adhere to those regulations. How will you share with a third party information? For example, most of the patients who are coming into hospital, in terms of those who are coming with a motor car accident, head injury, HIV positive diagnosis, and at the same time, they don't want to share with their family member or a couple like. So how will you allow other people to know the information? So there are steps that they need to. But another dilemma is knowledge-based. I think we need, like most of the healthy care, to have some kind of professional knowledge based on how issues of internet and information pertaining to the patients. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that those are very important and very specific issues. Yes, that's true. And this kind of say privacy and social media literacy of healthcare workers is very, very important. Say, I was asked many times by different healthcare professionals, let's say, here in Poland, for instance, to send certain information via email, or sometimes I've seen that in the hospital that people are taking pictures with their own phones of medical documents and are sending to each other as a way of communication using the, let's say, the channels which are not approved by the healthcare system. So I think that this is important. Diana,
But another, I can add a little bit. Excuse.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Effective is the costs. You know, having a system like helping to access data, but how do you consider the cost for? Though it is very fast, it is very easier for capturing all kind of information, but how the cost will it be? Look like a big like institution, how will you cover all those costs in terms of patient identifiable his or her information? So we need a little time for knowing how will you, is it maintain Name's part? Is it will be more maintaining for it's a short period, you introduce a new app and at the same time go as a short period and then it cut off. So make it in a way whereby it will be in a progressing, continuously process.
Yes, that's also very important aspect, especially in the context that you already mentioned, that let's say if we are building a new app and then we are resigning, for instance, or redesigning it or changing the settings, then we are failing the trust of people who are already using it. Yes, especially if that's the case of people who are not so, let's say, so digital savvy that they are able to use, let's say, old version of something. But when you make an update, let's say you want to improve their experience, but you are not because you think that your app is so intuitive. But for that people, matter of training to use that app, it's not intuitive at all. However, when they are trained, when they know how to use it, they have some benefits from using it. But when you change design, when you do an innovation for this particular group, for instance, for elderlies or for those people, this is not a change for better or for worse. You give them additional, let's say, cognitive costs, yes, to adapt to this new situation. Yeah, exactly. Diana?
Yes. I just want to say, perhaps it's not the main ethical problem, but what it's actually something that I put in the chat was thinking about how inclusive these methods can be, and you alluded to this idea right now, but in the specific case of changing the app, but like, aren't we excluding certain populations? Or, I mean, we can try as much as we want to reach everyone, but there are certain limitations that we have to acknowledge, specifically with like the elderly. I mean, no matter how much you're going to try to educate, there is going to be a portion who will not be able to benefit, perhaps. This might change with the like newer generations, since everyone's becoming more tech savvy. But yeah, I just this was something that crossed my mind when we were going through the different, like, the benefits of LHS, and yeah, I just feel, and other than the elderly, there's also like the very disadvantaged populations that would be really difficult to have access in the first place.
Yes, exactly, and maybe also I would add that not everyone is also willing to have all this, let's say, applications and smartphones. Excuse me. Right now, someone mentioned this movie Social Dilemma, and we know that the smartphones and smartphone application can be really psychologically addictive. And some person maybe have this preference not to be connected to internet on the regular basis, not to carry a smartphone. Yeah. And how we include them Abdul Rahman, you are waiting for a while, so please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I think this is a very interesting case that which try to balance between the risk and benefit, whereas there is a huge risk benefit from that from this system, the internet, but also it comes with a huge risk also. I think the issue that I've mentioned, privacy, fidelity, they are very important, and also accessibility, because internet is not accessible for everyone to use it. Sometimes in most of the world, it's a privilege to have the internet. And also one thing that I think could be a problem is credibility. We are not very sure that all the information we can obtain, especially from social media, that it really reflects the world, the real world. So putting your solution or your practice only based on that information could not be that benefit. It could not be used in the real world because it's only based on that scenario and that.
Yes, I see that Vadat also wants to say something. Please go ahead.
Yes, well, in addition to, I totally agree with Diana. It's we will be excluding a section of the population, whether it is due to their age or inability to access the apps, or as Abdulrahman said, not having internet access. But I think there's another issue totally unrelated to these problems. Where does the physician-patient relationship fit in here? Where is the dignity of the patient? If the physician or the app is going to rely on what the patient feeds the app by way of information, where is the human touch, the experience of the physician who can guide the patient by getting more information based on the conversation, based on the contact, based on the physical exam? I mean, this undermines the whole humane art of medicine. Thank you.
Yes, I think that this is an excellent point. I don't know if you are familiar with Abraham Verghese, if I pronounce his last name correctly. He's a medical doctor, and he also gave a very interesting TED talk about, I think it's titled Doctor's Touch, about this ritual of physical contact between patient and physician. And he also says about this importance of ritual in this relationship between patient and doctor. So yes, so this is very important, and this is something that this is a issue of let's say technology ethics or digital ethics, that there are that we know that the medium is not neutral. That medium actually changes how we perceive other person, what kind of information we receive from other persons. We already went through this experience that for during the COVID epidemics, we were all cut off, and how much we lost when we were seeing people just online, when we didn't have this like full contact. So I think that this is also a very important ethical aspect of this. Talia, please, you are raising your head.
Check you. I just wanted to ask you a question. So the many talks and discussions that have taken place today are very interesting, but there's something that I wonder about, and I think it's in a way also leading to tomorrow's talk, which is basically when the people who collect all these information are basically people who, or scientists or what have you, who live in countries that are basically powerful countries, so the superpower more than anyone else. And oftentimes the information collected can and is collected from people who are less advantaged and less powerful, which raises the possibility of abuse of the information for several reasons, in order to use them for scientific breakthrough, which is nice and dandy, but also for biological wars, for example, or for one eugenic form or another. And to talk about regulations, regulatory authorities or bodies on all these systems is quite dubious, because we know history taught us, particularly when we talk about wars, that regulatory bodies oftentimes speak about laws, but also oftentimes laws are not respected, are broken, even if parties are signatories to these laws, and nothing's being done about that. So what's your take? And thank you very much again.
Of course, that's very important issue that you raised. Let's say this is a very well known, let's say, imbalance on inequality that is in the world of science, that sometimes with Fai Young that you probably had lectures on the previous days. We actually co-authored, we wrote a paper about this, about owning the data, and about this kind of new way of colonizing let's say underdeveloped or developing countries, which right now can be considered as providers of raw data, which are then somehow processed in the developed countries, which have these powers of knowledge and technology. Of course, this is an issue. However, this is a very difficult to address, because like all this kind of, let's say, geopolitical issues are very difficult, and of course I don't have an answer how we can let's say effectively
nauka kolonialia, right?
Yes. Exactly.
Thank you.
So guys, because we are approaching the end of the presentation, so let me continue. I have just a few slides to the end. What you said, of course, is very important. I'm for the sake of simplicity and time, I'm focused only on certain aspects of this today. So one thing that we for sure need is this kind of a data governance ethics. Not only, but you mentioned also a special digital or technology ethics, but we can also think of data governance ethics. And right now, in this area, there is a very important proposal which was put forward by Barbara Freinsack and her team. They issued a very interesting report about data solidarity, which is available online, and it was commissioned by The Lancet and Financial Times. And basically, they distinguish between 4 kinds of research: low risk, high public value, high risk, high public value, low risk, low public value, and high risk, low public value research. And generally, they suggest that because of the value of solidarity, we should rather share our data, and especially for low risk and high public value research. When the risk is higher, we should put some kind of remedies for possible harm. And of course, when we talk about low public value research, we should either prohibit them or tax them. And in that sense, this kind of approach somehow also addresses the question of inequalities between countries, but of course there is a issue how we can enforce it on the global scale. But still, even if we have this kind of approach of this data solidarity governance, there are still questions for the future. So how should decide what has public value? And Barbara Pranczak and her team, they in this report they mentioned that they are working on the special instrument that would help them to decide what kind of research has what kind of public value. But I'm afraid that still it can be contested, and probably there is no very easy answer on that question. And another thing is also how we can and how we should enforce privacy law in this domain, because this is a very complicated domain. So even if we agree on this, let's say, particular issue, that let's say low risk and how public value research should be encouraged, there is still a lot of very concrete, specific questions that don't have answer. Okay, so right now is also time for question. That was my last slide. So if you still have some things to discuss, please. Yes. Please go ahead.
It's just to say thank you very much for my part. It's great. It's a great talk, intellectually stimulating and captivating. So really, Jan, thank you very much. I'm very happy I attended this.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, same here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I totally agree. Thank you so much.
Thanks.